wanted me to do a whole lot tonight. To begin with something I said in Sarajevo and talk about peace and planet, I'm going to talk about the dangers of nuclear weapons. I'm going to talk about the history of U.S. empire. I'm going to talk about diplomacy, and I'm going to talk about organizing in 20 minutes. So let's begin. You remember the Lincoln movie of Secretary of State Seward? In 1850, Seward was saying that if the United States wanted to become the world's dominant power, we had first to control Asia. Next. We have a bit of plutocracy, a bit of an oligarchy here. Our Secretary of State is a Forbes. Back at the time of the opium trade with China, the Opium War, his family was involved in bringing opium from Turkey. It's a long, difficult history. Next. Yeah. So I have my life has had a peculiar path. I ended up a middle-class Jew at Georgetown University back when, Catholic school. One of my classmates was a guy named Bill Clinton. We had a great course on U.S. diplomatic history taught by Jules Davids, who was, we didn't know at the time, the principal ghostwriter of Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. And we had this great lecture, I always remember this lecture, in terms of the 1890s. And he described how in the early part of the 1890s, Roosevelt, Cabot Lodge, and Admiral Mahan really moved to build the fleet that we needed to challenge the British control of the seas. When Seward was around, we couldn't get the path to Asia because the Brits and the French and the Germans and the Spanish all had the stepping stones, the islands that we needed for coaling stations. But with the sinking of the Maine in Havana Harbor, we then had the excuse. I remember David's talking about Subic Bay, which I have since seen. It's a beautiful, deep, perfect bay, just jumping off point to get to the Chinese coast. So with that, we begin our global empire. A book that's really worth reading, very important, Zbigniew Brzezinski. You'll remember Jimmy Carter's National Security Advisor, the founder of the Trilateral Commission. For his students, he wrote this book, The Grand Chessboard, which is essentially a primer on how to maintain the U.S. empire. Next. And what he says there is that kind of old geostrategy, it's if you control your Asia, then you are the world's dominant power. And like Britain before us, the United States is, within this frame of reference, an island power. So we have to have, as he writes there, we have to have our footholds on the western, eastern, and the southern flanks of Eurasia to project our power. Of course, they have more than 1,000 foreign military bases around the world which help us. So if you look to Europe, for example, we've had since 1945 NATO, which is the foundation of our power in Western Europe. For years, it's now under some challenge, our control of the Middle East, the southern flank, and now we're into Afghanistan, right? And this is our southern flank there. Now India is our new major tacit ally. And to the east, we have Japan, the Philippines, and of course further south we have Australia. And this is the foundation of the empire. Next. Yeah, so, lots of details here. But, just to appreciate how different our country is from other nations. To understand we have been at war almost continually since 1945. Whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Grenada, whether it's Iran, whether it's Afghanistan. We've been at war, basically, since 1945 to maintain this empire. Next. And the reality, the very unhappy reality, is that our nuclear weapons have been the ultimate enforcer of this empire. Think back to Teddy Roosevelt, speak quietly, carry a big stick. Most of us tend to think that the last time U.S. nuclear weapons were used was Nagasaki, which I'll explain was not true at all. But even if you go back and do the history, read the history, the principal reasons for dropping those A-bombs, the determinative reasons, were that Truman wanted to bring the war to an immediate end before the Russians came in, so he wouldn't have to share influence with them in northern China, in Manchuria, and in Korea. and by and large, that worked at least for a time. Next. Then we come to NATO and the current moment, right? You'll remember that there was an agreement between Bush and Gorbachev. Bush said that we would not move NATO 1 centimeter closer to Moscow in exchange for the Russians accepting the unification of Germany essentially on West German terms. And now, of course, we have moved NATO to the borders of Russia. You know, I have no love for Putin. I mean, believe me, I have no love for Putin. But if you look from a Russian perspective and think about their history, invaded by Napoleon, catastrophe. Invaded by the Kaiser, catastrophe. Invaded by Hitler, catastrophe, all from the West. So when the United States moves to their borders with NATO, you know, we should expect that there's going to be a bit of a response. Next. So then moving to current nuclear threats. You know, the degree to which we live in Disneyland is just stunning. So if we look at our just the really current history, we know that the United States conducted simulated nuclear attacks against North Korea within the last 2 years. We know that in the earlier stages of the crisis, the war in Ukraine, both the United States and Russia exercised their nuclear weapons, which of course provides an opportunity also for miscalculations and accidents. And most recently, as you know, Putin has said that if you try to touch Crimea, we have our nuclear weapons, don't you dare. Next. So then we look to the Cold War history. And see, I woke up in Copenhagen in 1973, at a time when we thought the Middle East war was already over. You know, it was supposed to be a ceasefire. And people I was staying with were listening to Armed Forces Radio. And it was explained on Armed Forces Radio that the United States nuclear arsenal was on DEFCON alert. I thought maybe it was a coup d'etat with Nixon in the last days of Watergate. And in fact, if you again do your studies, you find out is that Secretary of Defense Schlesinger had said no major movement of U.S. troops in the United States without his explicit order, because he had doubts about what Nixon might actually do. In fact, and I can't go into detail about it now, in fact, it was Kissinger who ordered that nuclear alert in order to ensure that the Russians did not intervene to break an Israeli siege of an Egyptian army that was being denied both water and food. But that then led into other work and some close associations with Dan Ellsberg, who was an important teacher for me. What you see here is the number of times the United States has prepared and threatened to initiate nuclear war in the Middle East during the Cold War. 1946 over Iran before Russia had the nuclear weapons, 56 in the Suez Crisis, 58 Lebanon Civil War and the Iraqi Revolution, 67 the Six-Day War, 1970 Black September, 73 the one I just mentioned, 1980 and 81 the Carter Doctrine to control Middle East and the oil. Of course, you know, the oil in the Middle East was the great prize of the Cold War era. Next. And then we have the same in Asia. I mean, we always thought, you know, this kind of overlay. People thought, you know, nuclear weapons and the building of the weapons was all about the U.S. and Russia. But to appreciate that that was in many ways an overlay, you know, at that point of about 100 years of U.S. Imperial history, which is what Brzezinski calls it, in order to maintain our dominance. So, you know, without going into details here, we prepared and threatened to initiate nuclear war against Vietnam 4 times, Korea at least 9, China at least 4. Next. And then we come to the post-Cold War era. Again, we kind of live in this illusion. But beginning with the Gulf War in 1991, you had nuclear threats made by Bush, Quayle, Cheney, and the British Foreign Minister Major. Other threats have included against Libya, against China, over Taiwan, Korea. Sometimes came very close to it. Clinton almost wandered into a nuclear war, as did Bush in the post-Cold War era. We've had all options on the table against Iran. We had the simulated nuclear attacks against North Korea. On September 11th, 2001, they put U.S. forces on a DEFCON alert. Threats were made in 2002, both in relationship to the 2001 Afghanistan, 2002 in relationship to Iraq. Next. Of course, other nations have made nuclear threats, but this is the sum total of them, so you get a sense of the proportion here. Next. Then I've participated in a thing called the Human Consequences of Nuclear Weapons meetings, been held in Mexico and in Austria. Oh no. Half time, okay. The one in Austria in December, there were 158 governments there. A lot of experts came and testified. You sit in there and you come out of it, and you understand just how precarious our situation is. So without going into detail, Eric Schlosser has written this book, Command and Control. You may have read some of his articles in the New York Times, and in which he basically runs through the history of U.S. nuclear weapons accidents. I mean, a lot of them. Dropping atom bombs over North Carolina, the weapons falling in Spain. We lost one nuclear weapon off an aircraft carrier in Okinawa. So long Minuteman missiles blowing up, launching the bomb into Arkansas. I mean, it's a long history. On top of that, you've got miscalculations. Now we have increased danger of cyber hacking. You've got the danger of terrorism and possibilities of failures of deterrence. Which Schlosser concludes, and if you're talking to heads of state and foreign ministers, as I say, and ambassadors of 158 countries, his conclusion is that we are alive today more as a function of accident and luck than a function of policy. I'll just say here, it's not only on the United States, right? There's a recent study by Physicians for Social Responsibility that says the exchange of 50 to 100 strategic weapons targeted on cities, say between India and Pakistan, and they had nuclear threats, exchanged nuclear threats in 1999. The use of 50 to 100 would lead to fires that would create smoke, that would lead to global cooling, that would lead to a collapse of agriculture in the northern hemisphere, which would lead to the starvation and death of up to 2 billion people. So the dangers are very real. Next. Again, among my privileges, I've been able to observe just how isolated the United States and the other nuclear powers are within the international diplomatic world over nuclear weapons. I mean, you can't really get this from the New York Times. But a year and a half ago, there was the high-level meeting on disarmament at the United Nations. Just about every government in the world was there. After Ban Ki-moon spoke, you had the speech by President Rouhani of Iran, speaking both for Iran and for the non-aligned movement. And he made essentially 3 points. One, Iran is not seeking a nuclear weapon. Secondly, the world is outraged that the United States and the other nuclear powers have yet to fulfill their commitments under Article 6 of the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, in which they commit to good faith negotiations for the complete elimination of their nuclear arsenals. The rest of the world is really angry over that. And third, that the United States had failed to co-convene a sacred promise in 2010 at the NPT review. The United States had failed to co-convene a conference in Helsinki in 2012 designed to begin moving the process toward the creation of a Middle East nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction-free zone. Now, it was interesting that he spoke, but what was really remarkable was that one head of state, one foreign minister, and one ambassador after another got up and associated themselves with the speech given by President Rouhani of Iran on behalf of the non-aligned movement. And you can see how isolated. What was the United States' response? We are fulfilling our obligations under the 2010 NPT review. Under China's leadership, we have almost completed the terms of reference of a glossary. Stunning. So this is how it's working. Next. And also, I'd say that others, at the Human Consequences conferences and others, I mean, you see time after time the isolation of the United States and the anger. And actually, I think the Obama administration is hoping as it comes into the NPT review now that it'll be able to coast on the deal with Iran and the fact that we have gotten rid of 150 out of 7,000 of our nuclear weapons on Obama's watch. Of course, there are alternatives. There's diplomacy. There's the idea of common security, which was basically the foundation and the framework by which the Cold War was ended. Next. So a little bit about the NPT, watching time here. The NPT was negotiated in the late 1960s. It went into effect in 1970. It rests on 3 pillars. The vast majority of the world's nations resolved that they will, they forswear legally never to obtain nuclear weapons, never become nuclear powers. In exchange, they get 2 things. Article 6 from the first 5 nuclear powers, that they will engage in good faith negotiations to completely eliminate their nuclear arsenals. The need to do this was reinforced by the International Court of Justice in 1999. And then third, the major flaw in the treaty is that the non-nuclear nations have the right to generate nuclear power under for peaceful purposes under the rules and the guidelines of the International Atomic Energy Commission. You've just heard why that's a disastrous approach. Next. So simply to say, this is in Hiroshima. The man in the middle is Ambassador Kemen from Austria. He's the man who took the lead in organizing the Human Consequences Conference in Austria. His purpose there was to try to build some momentum toward a successful NPT review. The fear of if the NPT review fails, if they don't come up with agreements, if they don't make serious progress, given some past history that I'll go into in a minute, we're in danger of seeing that treaty collapse. And you can imagine where that would lead. Actually, next 2, we'll skip the next one. Skip the next one, we're doing time here. Yeah, so just to say, at the conference in Vienna, among the speakers was a woman from St. George, Utah. And we need to appreciate that we've got about 1 million downwinders in this country. You've seen the film of the soldiers in the trenches, and there's a tactical nuclear weapon and a little mushroom cloud, and then they go running into it with all their gear, right? They were testing to see how soldiers could operate in a nuclear environment. They're all dead. I mean, they all died of cancer, right? Both with the atmospheric testing and even with the underground testing when there's venting, the fallout would move east. They always did the test when the wind was blowing away from Las Vegas. Move across Nevada, up into Utah, up into Idaho, and then we move west, rather east. And always Kodak would be told, shut down your plant because we've just done a test and we don't want you to expose all the film that's there at your plant. This woman was wheeled onto all the speakers spoke from their from the written speeches. I'm running late here. I got to tell her story. And she's wheeled onto she's from St. George. That's the Red Rocks. That's where they made the Western movies. That's ground zero for fallout. And I've worked with so many people from St. George, all dying of cancer. And one woman I know, her father-in-law died of cancer from uranium mining. Her sister died from the fallout. Her daughter died from the fallout. And she takes a line of pills every day this long. Anyhow, Michelle Thomas gets up there, wheeled on, and she says, "My government has killed me." And she goes on to describe the horrors of living in St. George. She goes on to describe what her life and suffering are about, and that she's about to die. And she knows who's responsible. She basically ran away from the conference. Next. Colonel Petrov is the man who saved humanity. In terms of miscalculations here, he joined us by videotape. Basically talked about miscalculations. The Soviet Union had been warned, advised that the Norwegians would be testing a weather satellite. The word didn't get through. He's looking on his screens. Looks like an incoming United States nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. He's supposed to push the button, and then they have 8 minutes in Moscow to retaliate. And he looked at it, and somehow he just didn't think it was right. And so he didn't push the button. And we're all alive. And he was demoted. Next. So, in 2010, and Jonathan and Jim, a few other people here will remember, we, on the eve, and just to say, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty has a review conference every 5 years. And this is a time when the nations of the world can try to hold one another accountable to their commitments. We're in some danger at the moment, as I said before, especially because the rest of the world doesn't trust the United States at this point. I hate to say it, but you look at the Middle East nuclear weapons, WMDC free zone conference didn't take place, can they really trust the United States? In any event, we were amazed in 2010 that Ban Ki-moon accepted our invitation to address our conference at the Riverside Church. And more remarkable still, I mean, was his speech, which really expressed real compassion and understanding for the sacrifices that we all make to try to get rid of nuclear weapons, to bring peace, to create justice. And then he went on to say, governments can't do it alone. We need you to push from below. And that's why we're organizing Peace and Planet this time around. That's why I want you to be at the conference, why I want you to be at the march, at the rally, and at our festival. Our activity, just to say, our analysis is that our single issue campaigns aren't working, right? My issue is nuclear power. No, my issue is fracking. My issue is Walmart. My issue is police militarization, racism. Right? My issue is Venezuela. My issue is, on. We have single issues. We don't make it, and we don't look at the connections between them and understand. We have to understand the connections between them, and we have to build a more unified movement. So as we're building our mobilization, this is what we're doing: working to integrate the analysis, bringing together movements as best as we can, recognizing that we're still early on, but we're committed to this also for the long term. Our two basic goals with the mobilization are, one, that the review conference should end with a mandate to begin those negotiations that are required by law and which by U.S. law are requirements, the highest law of our land. And secondly, to contribute to this integrated movement building for the longer term. Next. Kind of a list of our actions. I think I've kind of gone through this. And then just to say who's coming, who'll be there next. We've got more than 1,000 people from Japan coming. They're bringing about 7 million petition signatures. About 50 A-bomb survivors. They're not young, they're not kids anymore. I mean, the most iconic of the you'll see this picture next. We'll go there in a minute. We've got people coming from Korea, including Korean A-bomb survivors. I mean, there were Korean slave laborers in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And one of the A-bomb survivors from Korea will be with us next. From Europe, actually we have a member of the European Parliament coming from England. We've got like 70 French, mostly from unions, coming next. At our conference, we'll be beginning by, actually we just learned today that Angela Kane, the UN High Representative for Disarmament, will be with us to open the beginning of the conference. And then we're going to honor two of the most courageous A-bomb survivors ever. Setsuko Thurlow lives in Canada. She does not have the kind of self-diminishing Japanese way that sometimes is there. She is right out there, just absolutely condemning the madness of what the governments are doing. What you see in the lower right-hand corner is a picture of Mr. Taniguchi from Nagasaki. This picture was taken by the U.S. Army. You can't believe that this man lived. He still has open wounds. He doesn't sweat. The photograph that you see there was one of the photographs that was supposed to be at the Smithsonian Institution when they were to have the exhibit for the 50th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. That exhibit was canceled by the Air Force, under pressure from the Air Force Association and conservative members of Congress. So he will be with us next. Deep political analysis, Zia Mian from Princeton, Rainer Braun from Germany, next. We are working to bring in young people. Look around this room. We're not going to succeed if we don't have young people really at the core of the movement. And so these are some of the young people that we're working with. Two on the right are actually our staff. The woman on the left is the young Assistant Secretary General of the New Japan Women's Association. She'll be speaking next. Walden Bello, some of you may remember from years back, an incredibly courageous man coming from the Philippines. And I saw in the earlier slideshow about uranium mining and the Navajos. This is a man who, Manny Pino, is working primarily around uranium mining in the Southwest. Next. Move the money, right? I mean, the United States is about to spend $1 trillion, for developing new nuclear weapons and the delivery systems over the next 30 years. I mean, think about your schools, think about the noise of the subway here, think about what we need to do to work against climate change. education, I mean, you name it, $1 trillion for preparations to end the human species. Thomas de Toledo is coming from Brazil, from the largest peace and environmental organization in Brazil, almost on here next. A member of the German Parliament coming with us, and some of you will have followed Reverend Sekou, one of the leading figures from the struggle in Ferguson. Actually, originally, but he was in Boston for quite some time. So he'll be with us both at the conference and the rally. Almost done. Next. Actually, we're done. Actually, one more. Yeah, just two more. So on the left, you have Tony de Boon, the Foreign Minister of the Marshall Islands, and incredibly courageous. I mean, we can talk about the Marshall Islands, 64 nuclear weapons tests, right? The purposeful irradiation of the people of Longolap. He negotiated the Marshall Islands independence, and he launched the International Court of Justice cases against the 9 nuclear powers. I mean, incredible courage to appreciate just how incredibly dependent these people are on the U.S. government, and still saying what you're doing, that is only immoral. It's a crime, friends. It's a crime. That's why nuclear power, it's a crime. And then a member of the Japanese Parliament will be this. The last slide. This was actually from this summer in Hiroshima, when the Japanese were showing how many petition signatures they had at that time. There is this movement in which everybody does what they need to do.